Hey guys, not a character design today, and that's fine, This case, it's an environment design based on, once again, my D&D character, since that seems to be the overarching theme of my YouTube channel so far. It's not going to stay that way, sometimes I might differ, but for so far I'm having fun just kind of creating art for my D&D campaign. The party really seems to enjoy it as well. You guys, if you watch my videos, you probably know how I think fun is the crucial fundamental in art, and something that a lot of people tend to neglect. And in order to keep things fun, variation is also key. So as an artist personally, I tend to do quite a lot of stylized characters, but I don't tend to stick to one subject for too long. In fact, I have been called the Flavor of the Month artist before, which I think is a very fun nickname, and I wholeheartedly accept that title as now part of my own little lore, I suppose. And the Flavor of the Month artist kind of gives me the title that shows that I actually have a lot of interests, and having a lot of interest kind of stems from an inherent sense of curiosity, ambition, combined with just a tad bit of rivalry with maybe some of my friends that are creating amazing art as well. So whenever I switch a subject, it's usually because I saw a project that did something that I was just so in awe by that I thought, this is something that I want to learn how to do. This is something that I really want to work towards. And it might differ from what I usually do. But again, if you want to be like a very well-rounded artist, that curiosity, that ambition, and that rivalry, so to speak, that is kind of what keeps you motivated, keeps you engaged to try a different subject, to make sure that you are still heading into the direction of becoming more of a generalist. Because generalists, in my opinion, are the most well-rounded artists out there. So in this case, switching away from character design into, for example, environment design, the design principles still remain the same. So all of the theory just translates rather well, which is amazing to see how, you've learned one bit of information and it just applies to so many different situations. And the environment design is just one example of that. But by treating it in the same way I do a character design, I do feel like I'm getting to a point where I'm able to use like my more expressive shape design and shape language that I tend to use for my characters in my environment as well. And it really helps kind of bring more personality into my environments, which is, I think, one of the added benefits of making sure that you are a generalist. Again, when you would simplify, when you would focus only on architecture, for example, I might never aim for that level of personality and storytelling that I would get if I would be more into the character design stuff, because personality obviously is much more easy to associate to a person, to a character. But when I'm creating this environment in particular, for example, the personality of the character that lives in there, being my Tortle character, is actually one of the things that I really wanted to shine through. So obviously the house itself is pretty Tortle themed. The design is supposed to resemble a Tortle in some way or another, in order to just be a bit more playful and really get the theme to be very clear. That's kind of what I was hoping for, to get like a very clear theme and hook to my design, so that it becomes nice and recognizable. So the turtle tends to reappear in certain parts of the design. The roof is basically a turtle shell. The doorway is also kind of shaped like a turtle. So that's all done very purposefully. But sometimes, when you have your first initial thumbnail going, you might want to do a little bit of extra research and a little bit of extra development process to make sure that you actually, when you go into the finishing of the design, you know what to finish it with. So the doorway felt a little bit underdeveloped to me. So I decided to go back in, do some other sketches, maybe some additional sketches that helped me really nail down what that entranceway should look like, because I thought that was pretty important. Just like the face in a character, the entrance of a building should probably be the focal point. And that being said, it should also be quite, hopefully, iconic and recognizable. Plus also these kind of additional sketches tend to be very fun and relaxing. You can do these very quickly, like in between sessions, in between work or something. Just pump out a couple of these sketches, and it's a great addition to a portfolio piece as well, by the way. Now, personally, I'm not necessarily going for portfolio pieces anymore. I just like to create art for what I think is enjoyable. But being a concept artist, obviously, the design process is kind of an inherent thing. That's not something that's optional for me anymore. It's actually something that I just kind of default to, because I am in the business of trying to figure out the best solution to a problem. And to do that, we obviously need to have iteration, variation, to get the best solution to that problem, so that the designing process, the eventual creation of my entire environment goes a bit more smoothly and I don't run into as many issues. You'll notice that in this design process, by the way, once I actually start putting it in 3D, I might notice a few issues with the initial thumbnail sketch, and that's expected. That's kind of what happens with architecture design in particular. If you're designing from an orthographic view, if you try to change the angle, things might not work anymore. And when that's the situation, it's your responsibility to make adjustments still, because the designing process doesn't stop after the thumbnailing phase. The thumbnailing is just kind of to get the initial brainstorming out of the way, and then while finishing the design off, that's when we actually want to spend almost like most of our creative thinking and our critical thinking to make sure that it holds up, it still works, because that quite often that won't be the case. So immediately I discovered, well, the roof is cool and all, but wouldn't really work that well, because I was stuck on the question, what material would it be made off of? I could have just as well said it's an ambiguous, just fictional material. It might have been made of straw, might have been made of wood, but if it's made of wood, then I need wooden boards. So I eventually restructured the entire roof to something that made more sense to me. And you can even see in the drawing, like I procrastinated drawing the roof quite a lot, because again, I didn't necessarily know where it was headed. But I decided to reinvent it, redesign it, so that I had a very clear structure that I could follow. So I segmented it into separate bits, tried to make sure that the silhouette still remained roughly the same, and instead of leaning into the turtle aspect, I decided to lean more into the ship aspect, because my character, being a turtle, is also a seafarer, so he's lived on his ship for the most part. He's also a pirate, by the way, if you're curious about the backstory. So the ship hull in there I thought was a very fun sort of way to kind of get, again, that theme in there. So the theme right now is Turtle Pirate. And Turtle Pirate, you know, the ship combined with the turtle shell motif hopefully gets that idea across at least. The benefit there as well is obviously the hull of the ship gives me a very clear structure to follow when it comes to building up that actual architecture to make that make sense. Now, initially, I was just started sketching this thing for fun, and I really didn't necessarily know where it was going, but fairly quickly I decided, yeah, this is something that I would want to paint. I would want to make a little bit of a keyframe on. So that's immediately something I focused on, and the first swatch of colors is obviously very important. And I thought to myself, it might actually be fun to play around with like what's underwater as well. Imagine we have a pirate turtle that is able to breathe underwater to a certain degree, or at least stay underwater for a long time. It might be actually interesting to have a hint at the fact that there might be more underneath the water surface. So maybe there's like a cave underneath where he would be able to enter to hide some of the treasure that he doesn't want to hide above ground. And the house is sort of just like a relaxation place, let's say. So the cliffs underwater I thought were a fun way to kind of get that going, as well as just being a nice, you know, visual appealing thing in there. Like I really had a lot of fun painting this. That just kind of makes it once again feel a bit more unique. And I think one of the main important things when you are designing an environment with like a house or a piece of architecture is don't just drop it on top of a flat surface. We actually want to make sure that it is integrated in the environment itself. So you can see very clearly how the house itself is sort of sagging in between those dunes and those hills, and we actually have almost like a cave underneath the house itself. The walking plank going off to the front door, for example, is also kind of a fun way to bridge the gap between those elements so that the front door will be maybe a bit more accessible. But because I have different levels and the way it's integrated in the environment, that also forced me to do once again a little bit of extra problem solving that drove me to create like extra entrances, because the front door is maybe a bit difficult to access at times, but the door underneath might be more easy to kind of drag cargo in, like from the ships or whatever they came to shore with. And then obviously on the top floor to the right you also have your side entrance to maybe head into the forest. And I thought that really did help, kind of making sure that the house feels a bit more functional, a little bit more, again, integrated in the environment. I think that's quite important to focus on. The actual rendering of the environment is actually pretty rough. I don't necessarily have that many details in there. It might seem that way, but it's mainly just accurately designed shapes, nice contrast and values and color use, and making sure that we have a very clear focal point. I think in this case, since the house itself is the focal point, that's obviously, you can't mistake where I would want you guys to look. But the thing to keep in mind is the further we go away from the focal point, the less detailed things need to be. So if you have a wander through the entire painting, you can see that the house has very high fidelity. It's very like refined compared to the rest of the design, and the rocks immediately next to the house also pretty nicely rendered, pretty clean. And the further we go to off to the side, where the rocks maybe don't matter as much to the overall scene, or maybe the bushes of the trees, it's a lot of suggestive detail. So rather than painting every single leaf, I painted the few leaves that are breaking through the dark shapes behind the bright shapes. Rather than painting every single tree trunk, I'm painting the negative space in between the tree trunks. Rather than painting every single crack in the rock, I'm just putting down a few, leaving most of the shapes empty to hint at a more complicated texture without necessarily having to fill it in. And I think learning how to suggest detail is one of the more difficult but more satisfying things that you can learn as a painter or artist or designer. Now, the level of finish of this entire piece isn't necessarily required for a concept piece. Like, depending on what it is that your intention is for the environment, you might as well stop after the line art, just slap in some flat colors, hint at the materials, and that's perfectly fine. Now, I'm personally, I'm a painter. I like painting. I like using vibrant colors. I like adding a little bit of extra storytelling, like the flags I'm adding right now, which might be, for example, flags of ships that he raided in the past. And those things for me bring a image to life. Whether it is from a concept art standpoint or not, that life, that storytelling, that is what I personally am looking for in other people's artwork. Quite often you'll see on ArtStation pieces of art that are technically very well executed, but lack that personality, and it feels just, for lack of a better term, generic. And I think genericness is something that is the primary thing you want to avoid being a designer. So if you've seen it before, you might want to figure out a way to kind of shift away from what you know already exists. That doesn't mean cliches aren't allowed to be in your piece. That doesn't mean you aren't allowed to create something that is pretty close to something that already exists. It just means you need to add a unique hook to a design. So in this case, again, I had Tortle Pirate, which hopefully provided a pretty unique starting foundation for my environment design, even though maybe the beach and the cliffs aren't necessarily that unique itself. So you need to make sure that you have one at least recognizable hook, one unique feature to your design. And usually the starting point of a designing process is where that uniqueness should already come into play, because it's much easier to design with the intent of having that unique hook in your design process than it is to retroactively try to make something stand out that maybe has a bit more of a mundane foundation. So I hope you guys enjoy a little environment process as well. Obviously, again, it's more of an art talk rather than an actual process video. The process videos are in the make, so you'll see them pretty soon, hopefully. But for now, I'm actually just having fun uploading these things. I know that I'm getting pretty good responses from you guys as well, so I know at least some of you are enjoying it as well. So hopefully I'll see you in the next video, and feel free to leave a comment with suggestions on what you'd like to see. Take care.